Yeah. Good evening, friends. In this event of Reading Hub, we are going to have this discussion on Rajaraja Chola by Kami Dandapani. Book has been published by Aleph. And after the event, if you're picking up a copy, you can get the author to autograph it. Therefore, the copy is available here. And now, why this book? There's so much of discussion about Rajaraja Chola, and most of the entry point has been fiction. People come to Rajaraja Chola either to the film or through Kalki's Ponniyin Selvan. For us to look at Rajaraja Chola from a different lens, which is not the film or it's not Kalki itself, is an interesting opening. And as a journalist, for me, the key aspect is any work has two trajectories. One is bearing witness, or other one is to make sense. A history book is an attempt where you use secondary sources of bearing witness to make sense. And when you're using secondary sources to make sense, what are the filters you use to trust your sources? These are the questions which come to my mind. And hence, for me, this book is so central because we also have these young research scholars with us. Therefore, we would like to start with the process you followed to do this book.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me here. The process was very, very difficult. And in some ways, I was telling you earlier, I have come full circle. My research actually began right here at this library. Mrs. Ramani Natarajan was very kind to put me in touch with Mr. Sundar. And in the early days, I had absolutely no idea. So my mandate was to write a layman's history of the Cholas. And before I carry on about the research process, I want to ask all of you two questions. How many of you here have heard these names? Babur, Humayun, Akbar, Jahangir, Shah Jahan, Aurangzeb? Okay. How many of you have heard these names? Vijayalaya, Aditya, Parantaka, Gandaraditya, Arinjaya, Sundara, Uttama. Wow. Okay, that's great to know that. And this kind of response would probably happen only in this room, because in our school histories, we were all taught much more about the Mughals and barely anything about the Cholas. So the second set of names I gave you were all the names of Chola emperors until Rajaraja Chola. So there is a lot of academic research that covers the Cholas, but very little that is, so you have two extremes. One is very academic stuff that is very boring, very dense, very deeply scholarly, and that is of interest only to an academic community. And then you have the Ponniyin Selvan type stuff, which is historical fiction, which is like, you know, there's a bare coating of history over wild imagination. So my job was to delve into the research. I have not read Ponniyin Selvan at all. I deliberately did not read it because I didn't want that to kind of control my thinking or mar my thinking in any way. And I really did not know where to start. I know some of you are history scholars, PhD scholars here, embarking on your own research projects. And research is not easy. So you go down numerous dead ends, numerous rabbit holes. You just read. That's what I did. I just read and read and read and read. My foundation stone was a book called The Cholas by Neelakanta Shastri, but that's about 80 years old. And there is a lot of very specialized research on different aspects of Chola life, for instance, just the military campaigns, or just the Brihadishwara temple, or just the bronzes, or just the trade, or just the organization. And they're incredibly detailed and incredibly dense and incredibly boring, but you have to go through all that, come up for air, and then kind of sit back and look at the big picture in all this. So that's what I did. And you will find there's a lot of disagreement. One set of scholars will say one thing, one set of scholars will say another thing. And I'm not a historian, so most of my research was secondary in nature. I did no primary research other than to actually visit Tanjavur and some of the places, but everything else was reading what others had to say and try and make my own interpretations of things, or also just put everything out there. This one person said this, another person said quite the opposite. And then just, we don't know the truth at this point. The truth could be one or the other, or neither, or both. So you have to have an open mind about what you're reading. And also, the Cholas were master inscribers. They wrote a lot of stuff about themselves on the temple walls that needs to be taken with a hefty dose of salt, because their purpose was, yes, to record their history and talk about what went on, but it was also to aggrandize themselves and make them out to be these great people. After all, they were ruling territories they had never ruled over before. They were controlling people who had not been under their control before. And they had to find a way to make that acceptable and something that those people could stomach. And one way to do it was to say that you are under this grand king who was descended from the sun and Lord Rama and all these great ancestors, and now you are part of this thing. So you need to look at the inscriptions that way. You do not take them literally, but you also step back and wonder, why did they say these kind of things? Why are they talking about themselves like that? So it was a learning process for me. I didn't know any of this when I set out, but eventually, kind of a picture emerges. And for anybody embarking on research, you just have to, a lot of spade work has to be done before you finally start seeing the big picture. So don't give up on that.
One thing which is fascinating is, while the book has such a huge canvas, it also has micro detailing of the personality. How did you work on this micro detailing of the person?
Again, it's a lot of reading between the lines. For instance, Rajaraja Chola, he was quite a few emperors down in what we like to call the imperial Chola line. He came to power after immense, struggles, and there was tremendous instability. And he kind of clawed his way through a bunch of battles and finally amassed a kingdom that was bigger than any, South Indian kingdom had been up to that point. And then he built this Brihadishwara temple, the likes of which had never been seen in the land before. The Chola temples until that point were small, like, 2-story structures, little stone buildings, all built in villages with strong religious associations. The Cholas came to power soon after what we call the Bhakti movement, and the Nayanmars and Arvas, who had been there a century or two before that, had, through singing songs and telling poetry in the villages of the Kaveri Delta, anointed those villages with a very deep religious significance. Now, Rajaraja comes along, he has his capital in Tanjavur, and he builds this absolute colossus of a temple that is huge. It's like 250 feet, 15 feet high, the Vimanam, on a scale that has never been seen before, and in a place with absolutely no prior religious association. There was no Nayanmar or Arvar who had written like that about Tanjavur. So in doing that, he kind of created a grand symbol of a unifying symbol for his empire. So it did not mean more to one set of people and less to another set of people. So I think that gives you an insight into the mind of Rajaraja, that he was a strategic thinker. Okay, to say that he built this only out of religious devotion is to kind of minimize his what he was about. Yes, I'm sure there's a great deal of devotion that was behind it, but there's also very canny strategic thinking. And this is what I talk about, like reading between the lines. I could be all wrong, but I do feel that that was a big motive behind Rajaraja building a temple like that. He drew the whole kingdom into the workings of his temple, so they felt invested in it. You know, there's a great deal of prestige in donating to the temple, in being a part of its ritual life, in being associated with the temple in one of many ways. So again, he kind of got a sense of unification, that you belong to this bigger whole by building that temple. And then another case in point about an interesting personality was Rajaraja's son Rajendra. Now, as I just said, Rajaraja poured money, like war booty and the revenues from villages from all over his kingdom into building the Brihadishwara temple. And it was a gargantuan enterprise. It was like this massive corporation, you know. Building it was one thing. Running that temple took tremendous, you know, organization and infrastructure and everything like that. He had just about finished it when he died, and his son Rajendra became the king. And you would think that Rajendra has always been portrayed as this very nice, dutiful son, dutiful to his father and his memory, that he would probably continue his father's legacy. But no, he just almost like swept it aside, built his own temple, in Gangai Konda Cholapuram, made that the capital of the Chola Empire, drew all the villages that had been contributing revenues to the Brihadishwara temple, were now diverted to contributing it to his Gangai Konda Cholapuram temple. So what was the thinking behind that? It's interesting. He's not just some sort of a quiet, dutiful son, but somebody who wants to establish himself. He had very big shoes to fill, and he was determined to fill that and more, you know. So these are the interesting psychological insights that I thought, I mean, I could be totally wrong, but I just felt that it's a far more interesting story than just a father and a dutiful son and nothing more. You know, those are caricatures.
More than father and son, the way you portray the women in this book is fascinating, especially aunt.
Yes.
How did you manage to cull out those details about the aunt?
Again, so most of information about the Cholas is through the inscriptions, what they wrote about themselves. And you read enough inscriptions and then you do get a picture. Yes, they are full of hyperbole, they're full of chest thumping. But if enough people say the same thing, you think there should be a nugget of truth in it. So this aunt that Mr. Paneerselvan was talking about is a queen called Shembian Mahadevi. She was the wife of Uttama Chola, who was Rajaraja's uncle. Now, if you see Ponniyin Selvan, most of the story is around when the Uttama Chola is kind of portrayed as a scheming fellow who schemed his way to the kingship, edging aside Rajaraja because Rajaraja's brother was murdered. And then Rajaraja should have become the king, but Uttama became the king instead. So all the possible machinations behind that are what make up the story of Ponniyin Selvan. But through it all, Shembian Mahadevi was a queen. She was a queen to a king called Gandaraditya, who from all accounts was a pavam, as we call it. Like he was a pious fellow, quite unsuited to the brutal rigors of kingship. And the story is that he abdicated. He just kind of rose and went west, which either means that he died or he went off to somewhere and lived a quiet, pious life. For most women in any part of the world, at any stage in history, that would have meant the death knell. You know, she was a widow. I mean, her husband was no longer king. she was nothing. But she hung on through multiple emperors. I think she was a woman, and it comes through in her inscription of great practical intelligence. And when her son became the king, that's when she kind of came into her own. She commissioned tons of temples. And again, like Rajaraja, it was not just purely a religious sentiment that drove her, but a very practical intelligence. The temple in those times was the main institution in every Chola village. So it was a hub and center of village life. So to have a functioning temple that functioned well and that provided employment for a wide range of people was very important. And she saw the importance of that. The other thing is most Chola temples were made out of brick in the early days. They would crumble, they would fall to ruin. She had them converted into stone. And not only that, all the inscriptions that were there on the original brick temples, she had them re-inscribed on the new stone temples. And she also had a note made that these are the old inscriptions that have been re-inscribed. So it's a woman with a thinking thing, that she's thought through all this, that people should know that this is a temple that has been rebuilt with the inscriptions that have been retransferred onto these walls. She commissioned new temples. I think it was thanks to her that the Lord Nataraja became the chief deity of the Chola Empire. She commissioned a lot of statues. The bronze idols came to their peak. I mean, under her patronage, actually. I think she patronized a bunch of bronze idol workshops, and some of the best ones were made under her patronage. She also has inscribed about agriculture and about irrigation in her name. So she had a practical intelligence too, because irrigation and agriculture were key things in the Chola's prosperity. The Kaveri River, harnessing the water of that river, the agriculture and irrigation there, they were all critical to the Chola wealth, besides their war booty and everything like that. So from getting just seeing the range of things that she was involved in and how she did it, I think she was a remarkable woman. And they say that Rajaraja might have stepped aside and allowed Sembian Mahadevi's son Uttama to become king out of respect for her. And we do know that he had so much of respect for her that he has proclaimed, Rajaraja, in his inscriptions, that any announcements or inscriptions made by Sembian Mahadevi would hold the same weight as him. So that's the kind of respect he had for her. So I think she was a remarkable woman, and her statue was taken out, her bronze image was taken out in procession, which is high honor in her own lifetime. This was done only to gods and the kings and maybe a few of the Nayanmar and Arvar saints. But for Sembian Mahadevi, a queen, a widow, somebody who could have been sidelined, to be given the same honor must speak of the high esteem in which she was held by her people.
Now, looking back, looking at your references, starting from Thiruvilangada bronzes to the inscription at Leiden,
Yes.
you have looked at multiple sources. What is the method you follow to harness these multiple sources?
So one wonderful thing I found was that all these inscriptions, so the Thiruvilangadu grant is a copper plate grant that was made by Rajendra Chola. The Leiden plates that he talked about are another set of copper plate grants that were made by Rajaraja Chola, granting, basically granting the revenues of a village to a particular temple. In the case of the Leiden grants, it was granting the revenues of a temple to, of a village to a Buddhist vihara that was built by an Indonesian king, actually. So it shows a farsightedness on Rajaraja's part that he was allowing a foreign king and a foreign religion, a non-Shaiva religion, to be supported. But all these inscriptions have been digitized and published in these volumes called the Epigraphia Indica. Now, sometime in the 19th century, the fields of Indology, Indian epigraphy, I think they started coming to life. And there's some amazing work done by people like Rao Bahadur Venkaya, Eugene Hulsh, Krishna Shastri, and a bunch of European and Indian epigraphists who painstakingly went to these temples, either got etchings of the inscriptions along their walls, or they sat and wrote them down. And, it was hard to understand. It's in a Tamil of an earlier era. So to figure out what was being said, for instance, one example is that people didn't in fact forgotten 3 or 4 centuries after Rajaraja that it was Rajaraja Chola who built the Brihadishwara temple. How do we know that? Because there's a manual of the Tanjavur district brought out by the British, who just mentioned, oh, there's this big temple called the Brihadishwara, which we think may have been built by some king called Kulatanga or some other name. It was not Rajaraja's name at all. And there was also a Sthala Puranam, or a mythological history of the temple, that came out during the Nayak era, which were long and convoluted fable with no mention of Rajaraja at all. So Rajaraja had been forgotten about. So it is these epigraphists who went there, deciphered, they kind of figured out the Tamil, they translated it, and the whole thing has been translated, annotated, commented upon, and put in English and Tamil, the original Sanskrit, because large portions of it are in Sanskrit, and in English, and put on the web in these volumes called the Epigraphia Indica. They're big tomes, and they're digitized and available online, and I found them entirely by choice. So again, you read through it, and then you see these copper plate grants and inscriptions. They start with a genealogy of the Chola Empire. They'll say this Chola who came from the sun, and then from the sun came so-and-so, and from so-and-so came so-and-so. So there's a kind of a mythological component, followed by a semi-historical component, followed by actual historical kings. So they trace their lineage. And if there are several copper plate grants that have these, and each one is quite different. There's, say, 50% similarity, but then each one will go off on a flight of fancy and have a different set of names that they claim are the Chola ancestors. So what do you make of that? You realize that you do not take these literally, that this is the Chola way of proclaiming their greatness, or proclaiming their great heritage. And as the years went on, their inscriptions became ever more grandiose and ever more like chest thumping kind of a thing. So these were their ways of proclaiming their greatness, as I said earlier. So you read the Tiruvalangadu grant, you read the Leiden grant, you see the differences, but the big picture is, why did they say these things? And the other thing you get from the grants is the nature of the business of the grant. So they will talk about the village. So you get an idea of life in Chola times. This village is being given to this temple, they will say. And then they'll describe the village, the dimensions of the village, what are the crops grown in that village, who are the kind of people living in the village. So it's a kind of a real, a snapshot into what life in that village looked like. And then the procedures for the execution of that grant are also spelled out in detail. So they'll take a female elephant who will walk around the periphery of the temple to mark the boundary. So then the whole bureaucracy that is in place to kind of record this grant, to make sure that the grant happens. So all this gives you an amazing window into Chola life. So I think those parts you can take for what they are. The earlier parts you take with a big dose of salt.
See, again, it leads to a most interesting question. That is, you are getting quite a lot of bits.
Yes.
How did you put these bits together? Because there is a clear personalities from these bits and pieces. How did you manage to build these personalities?
It wasn't easy. I guess there were enough bits to create a picture finally, like a jigsaw. You do have some pieces, you do have to fill in. I mean, we're talking about events and personalities that happened 1,000 years ago. So you have to put in some imagination. And I hope I'm right in what I've tried to be as factual as possible. But there is a good deal of information, so these inscriptions are tedious as anything. They're very, very, very boring. So you wade through all that and you do get a picture, you read enough of it. And again, for scholars and researchers, there is no substitute. There is no shortcut in any of this. You just keep at it and at it and at it, and a picture will emerge, so you just have to keep both a close focus and like a wider focus while reading. So it's
I think I'm going to open up so that students can ask questions. It's open to all of you. Generally,
you can ask anything.
yeah. And you're free to ask questions in Tamil.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the course of your research, my supposition is that engineering and science, like just the ability to build these large structures or copper refining or these things couldn't just come out in a single generation. So there must have existed some kind of a long history, or at least a few generations here, a few 100-year-old science and engineering already present. So did you find names of people who names of master engineers or master people, metallurgy people? It's always like the king did it, he take but you never see. Whereas in Western culture, you have in the Renaissance or whatever, there's always the creator gets credit. You always remember the creator and of the actual
creator is just lost to us. So no, we don't know who was the engineer or engineering mind or minds behind the Brihadishwara temple. And you're absolutely right, that kind of expertise did not come out of nowhere, it just didn't come out of thin air. But we don't know how that process, the evolution of that process, we do not know. Even bronze casting, there must have been a ton of trial and error, because in the Pallavas, that is when bronze casting actually started. And there is a lot of debate about the source of the copper for the bronze idols, because there's no copper in the immediate vicinity. So that is also a source of debate. Some scholars believe it came from Sri Lanka. And you need to, I think each copper, depending on where it comes from, has a particular chemical signature. And getting museums and places to agree to have those idols analyzed for that is quite a process. So no. So to answer your question, we do not have the names of any of the actual minds behind it. It was the king who kind of who wrote poems and poetry about the kings. Those are there, but not any of these other ones.
No, good evening, ma'am. The questions everybody had, that's about 1,000 years, yeah, and there is no motorized vehicles or anything motorized or anything electrical. It's very difficult to imagine, like in such a time, like how they built the stones, how did they cut it? It takes 100 to 200 days to cut one big stone, and that's the common man can do it. He can. I mean, 100 people can break it. But my thing is, how do they? Because all the temples are only one style, any temple, one style. And if there are 100, 200 stapatis or sculptors and involved, so they cannot do the same, like different painter comes with different paintings, And one person also cannot do, because he takes about 60 to 70 years for one person, maybe more to build, The style is same. Any temple you go, And how did they break the stones? How did they carry it? Even if you say there are elephants, elephants cannot carry such big boulders or things like that. If you get any information about it, please share
I
it.
think again, it's all just conjecture. So the Brihadeshwara temple, just talking about one temple, was built in about 6 years, which is remarkable because you look at the cathedrals of Europe, the Cathedral of Pisa, they built some of them over a couple of centuries also. So he must have just mobilized maybe his entire empire, like he's conquered Sri Lanka, he's conquered the Deccan, he's conquered Kerala, he's conquered all over. I'm sure they were all, drawn into this colossus of a venture that he did and he made. There is no granite. The Brihadeshwara temple is made out of granite. There's no granite near Tanjavur. So they assume it's quarried from, about 50, 60 miles away. And like you said, how do you bring it up? Either it was brought in coracles up the river or ferried on the backs of elephants. So clearly manpower was not a problem for Rajaraja or these kings. So and the people had no choice. They couldn't say, I don't feel like doing this. They must have all been forced into, doing this thing. So, and like you said, there must have been thousands of stapatis, thousands of sculptors, thousands of just manual laborers cutting the thing. You can just imagine that. So what must have gone into it? And he must have cracked the whip on them because, as I said, this thing was started, they say, in 1004 and it was finished by 1010, the whole Brihadeshwara. It's pretty remarkable. But there is nothing to tell us what the sweat and grind behind it was. All these poems are just eulogies, this great thing just happened like that. And then it was completed. So there's nothing to document the actual process of it. We do not have that.
Yes.
Shilpa Shastras are for the bronze images and all that. So stone also. Look, I have not read that.
All based on all the
They did consult the Agama Shastra, Shilpa Shastra, so the bronze and thing, but I don't know the exact process that they used for this. So those also, I think you need to kind of, they would not have given the whole picture of the actual, as I said, sweat and grime that went behind it. Okay, I should check it out.
I have two questions. I'll keep them brief. One is I wanted to know whether you had any information in the book about the Kerala entrance, which Rajaraja is supposed to have built after defeating the Keralites, and how it has come to be associated with Illa, that anybody entering through that entrance dies. That's one.
Okay.
Yes, and then the second one is I've recently come back from visiting a lot of the Hoysala temples in North Karnataka.
Okay.
And two of them, particularly one in Talakadu, the Chennakesava Perumal temple, and the one in Halebed, were both built after the Hoysalas had victory over the Cholas. So do you touch upon any of these wars or defeats of the Chola Empire in your book? Or can you give us a little bit more information?
The Keralantaka Gopuram is just mentioned. That's all. But I don't go into that much detail about it. And I think there's a photo of it in the book. As for the rumor that, somebody who dies, I have not. So I've tried to keep it to dry history and I have not touched upon that. And yes, the Hoysalas were both friends and enemies of the Cholas in later dates. So I've written about some of the battles in the book, but not any of those temples. So because that is more like from the Hoysala point of view. So the Hoysalas are mentioned as friends and enemies of the Cholas because they initially helped them against other rival, the Pandyas and other rival powers. And then they turned their backs on them later on. And so there's a bit of that. So.
Any other questions? Yes.
How much did information about the Cholas outside the region? How much did you find, how valuable were those in forming your perspective about what you wrote over here?
You mean outside the immediate Chola?
Outside, yeah, you've relied a lot on the inscriptions of the region, were there any inscriptions or any kind of material that you found about the Cholas outside the region that helped inform your perspective?
Yes. So the Chola's biggest enemies were the Pandyas. So I do read, so if there's a battle, say, between the Cholas and the Pandyas, I read the inscriptions that the Pandyas wrote about the same battle. And it's kind of funny because each one will claim they won the battle. Each one will claim that they chopped off the head of the Pandya or Chola reader. So again, but then you see the acid test of a battle or a region having been won is that the inscriptions of that emperor appear in that region. They can say what they want, they can say they won it, but if there is an inscription that appears in that region, say an inscription by a Chola emperor that appears in the Pandya region, that is the only way you know that they have actually conquered that region. So you again look at these inscriptions outside the Chola thing to see where they have inscribed, when it happens. So that's how these historians have also created a chronology, because as I said, they were grand at image building and publicity and public relations and chest thumping. But how much to actually find out if what they were saying was true is to read the other side's account and also to see where these inscriptions have been found. So yes, you do need to read other histories too. And that was definitely part of my research.
Madam, I have a small question.
Yes.
Very much is known about Rajaraja's birth, but very little is known about Rajaraja's death. There appears to be some mystery. The Maharajas University who undertook some archaeological excavation, they did not reveal the report after excavation was carried out. Do you have anything to say about that?
I don't have, so I was trying very hard to find out. So that's a very interesting aspect actually. So there is a little village, I think called Udayalur, in which somebody found a half-buried lingam in a shed in the middle of a field. And for whatever reason, they decided this was Rajaraja's memorial shrine, or this was where his remains were buried. And there was a great deal of excitement, and they put up a sign and said, this is Rajaraja's final resting place. But as I said, there is no proof one way or the other. The Archaeological Survey of India was told to come in, and they said, we're going to do a survey, use drones and do some sort of thing. And this was before the pandemic. The latest I could find, I think, was dated 2019. And they said, we're going to release a report. But I could not find any updated information on that. At the same time, there is another gentleman, I think it's Professor Devanayagam is his name. He's a professor of Chola history. He says that is not Rajarajas, that half-buried lingam in the shed in the middle of the field is not Rajaraja's burial place. But in that same village, there is a temple, and that temple is where Rajaraja is buried. And he cites a variety of reasons. In fact, I have written about that in the book, in my epilogue, as to why he feels that is Rajaraja's final burial place, or just his memorial shrine, and not the lingam in the middle of the field. So he has also said, please come and do a survey this place as well, and let us see. So that is, it's all hanging in the air right now. So this Professor Devanayagam believes that that lingam in the shed might actually be the burial or the memorial place for Rajaraja's murdered brother, Aditya Karikala, because he says the way, the direction that lingam is facing and other signs show that this was erected for a person who died an unnatural death, and Rajaraja's brother was murdered. So he says it could be his burial place, and Rajaraja's was in this Kailashanatha temple, maybe a kilometer or two away. So if all this is true, it's fascinating that the two brothers were laid to rest so close to each other, but it's as yet an unsolved mystery. So there's so much we still don't know about the Cholas. There's so much yet to be learned. And I think so that is ongoing, the research and excavations, many more inscriptions to be deciphered. And in time, I'm sure we'll get more information about the Cholas. More than 15 wives. I have mentioned the wives, yes, there's a bunch of them. And again, these wives were acquired, it's kind of sad to say it, but they were like political, they're pawns, so you kind of cast your net wide for friendship, like how do you secure loyalty and allies and stuff. You get yourself married to some daughter from there, and then they have no choice but to, become your loyal ally, because you wouldn't want to fight against your own daughter, right? So this marrying multiple women from multiple clans and tribes and even dynasty was a way of securing loyalty. And yeah, so there is some mention of that there as well. So. Have you spoken about the costumes, dresses based on paint? No.
Deepika, into the mic, please. Deepika.
So we usually speak about the social, political, and religious aspect. But in depth, if you see, we have numerous paintings in the Pallava temple, the Chola temple. But have we concentrated on the dressing style or the ornaments specifically?
Not really, unfortunately, because I felt those paintings are in such poor condition. It would be kind of meaningless. I mean, I just felt maybe you could get a line or two. So I just kind of left that aside, so that it's unfortunately it's more about the battles, and there's a lot about the religious movements, the temples, his trade missions, the trade that they did, so that is all like solid facts, I guess, that we have. How Rajaraja organized his empire and the land surveys that he did. That is all covered. So I kind of stuck to whatever I felt comfortable writing about. I felt comfortable that I had enough verifiable information. Again, I'm not a historian, so I just kind of piggyback off all the work that historians had already done, and that made sense to me. And that's what I wrote about. No textile history, no. Again, there's just a mention that their silks were coveted, that they were part of the trade and stuff, but no, that was not the focus really. So, I mean, this, as much as I've written, I could write a whole book on what I've not written. So just stop at some point and.
Yes, please.
வணக்கம் மேம்.
Yeah.
இந்த காந்தலூர் சாலை களமறுத்தருளி அப்படின்னு சொல்லிட்டு கல்வெட்டுல இருக்கு. அதுக்கு வந்து நிறைய பேர் நிறைய மீனிங் சொல்றாங்க. அதுக்கு அது உங்க பார்வையில எப்படி இருக்கு? நீங்க ஆய்வு பண்ணதுல என்ன கண்டுபிடிச்சீங்க அதை பத்தி?
So Kandalur Salai was one of Rajaraja's first military victories. அது கேரளால இருந்தது ஒரு இடம். And the Chera Empire was something that Rajaraja was after. And அவங்க ports எல்லாம் the trade ரொம்ப important இருந்தது. அங்கிருந்து to the west and east நிறைய boats எல்லாம் இருந்தது, ships that conducted trading in both directions. So other captured பண்ணதுக்கு அவருக்கு ரொம்ப important இருந்தது. So one of his first military victory in the Kandalur Salai இருந்தது. அங்கிருந்து they found inscriptions that showed it was a very violent attack on this place. அந்த இடம் என்னன்னு சொல்ல முடியாது. சில பேர் சொல்றா it is a military school. அதெல்லாம் எழுதியிருக்கேன்.
ஸ்கூல்னு சொல்றாங்க. அந்த ஸ்கூல் அட்மினிஸ்ட்ரேஷனை வந்து மாத்தி அமைக்கிறாரு, அந்த மாதிரி எல்லாம் வந்து
இருக்கு. ஆமா, அதெல்லாம் எழுதியிருக்கேன். இந்த மாதிரி இன்டர்பிரிட்டேஷன்ஸ் இருக்கு. இது வரைக்கும் யாருக்கும் டெஃபினட்டா சொல்ல முடியாது என்னன்னு. ஆனா அந்த இடத்துல ஒரு வெரி வெரி வயலண்ட் பெரிய பேட்டில் இருந்தது, அண்ட் ஒரு வயலண்டா ஒரு விக்டரி வந்தது ராஜா. அதான் நம்மளுக்கு டெஃபினட்டா தெரியும்.
ஓகே, தேங்க்யூ.
Yes.
Yeah. No, from the librarian's point of view, you have said that you did not find materials on certain areas, right?
Yes.
So what is your take on what should be done to do the future research, and what areas have you laid down certain areas where people can do research in these areas?
Research being done already. So, but some of it is very, very in very specialized areas, and it's not accessible to the public. So my research was limited to that which I could easily get, that was available in the public domain. And I'm sure again that I could write a whole book on what was not covered in this. But online resources are fantastic. This Roja Mutaya library has a lot of stuff. I mean, as I said, I started my research here. So there is information here, but there's a website called archive.org, which has remarkable stuff. I mean, that was my absolute godsend in that. So, but again, I'm not a scholar, I'm not a historian. So there must be a lot that I missed out on. And I think there's academic work being done in very, very specific areas. Like you asked, about the copper and the engineering skills of the people, like you asked. All that kind of stuff is being researched upon, but it's not easily accessible.
See, one aspect which comes to our mind is coexistence versus primacy of a single religion. And around the time of the later Chola, we see the Saivism becoming the dominant religion and the idea of coexistence being subjected to severe strain. What are the documents you managed to get about this strain about coexistence?
Again, there are inscriptions where, as you said, Shaivism was the dominant religion. But I think there was in one of the later Chola kings, there was a violent sort of a quarrel or disagreement between a Chola emperor and the followers of Rajaraja, for instance. And they feel that one emperor was killed, Atirajendra was his name. He ruled for only maybe a few weeks. And they feel that he might have been killed either by the fellow who became the next king or by the followers of Ramanuja who were insulted by his views on Vishnu. Apparently, he threw some statue of Vishnu into the sea, and he was so Shaivite that he would not allow anything else in his kingdom. So it was an interesting evolution of from the early days when Jainism, Buddhism, and a nascent Shaivism, it was coming into being right before the Cholas came, to the consolidation and solidification of Shaiva worship, but also the acceptance of other religions. As I said earlier, Rajaraja Chola endowed the revenues of one village to a Buddhist vihara in Nagapattinam. And that Buddhist vihara had been built by a king from Indonesia, the Sri Vijaya king, whose traders were coming to Nagapattinam to trade with the Cholas. And they wanted a place to worship for their religion. So he built this Buddhist shrine over there. And Rajaraja said, okay, I will help you maintain that shrine, and the village of the revenues of this village called Anemangalam will be given for you to maintain this. And a later Chola king continued that. And these are recorded in what are known as the Leiden grants that are now in Leiden University in the Netherlands. So there was a time of kind of tolerance, okay, you do your religion, I'll do my religion. But it seems to have become more rigid. And I guess that's how societies evolve also, when then this Shaivism became a very big thing, and a king might have paid for his life with that. And it's inscriptions that tell you this, that give you little nuggets that you kind of create a story out of.
Salaries are so small, like your side of this. Why do you want to build such a big temple? Because nobody inhabited it. And people say a lot of gold was hidden.
Yeah.
So that's why all the Muslim kings attacked.
Well, they didn't attack. Yes, they attacked because they knew there was a lot of wealth in these temples, and they came down seeking wealth. I mean, everybody was seeking wealth. The Muslim kings, Hindu kings, all of them were after wealth. So this is not a Hindu versus Muslim thing, but so they buried a lot of their idols underground, knowing that there were invasions coming from North India, and that the idols would probably be desecrated. And it's interesting because they were buried using very specific rituals underground, and only certain people knew where these idols were buried. By the time the Islamic invasions ended and that period of history was over, it was over 75 or 100 years. People had died. People forgot where these images were, idols were buried. And to this day, they're digging up idols. It's kind of very fascinating in fields and stuff like that. And that those idols, some of them have become part of the idol smuggling route. It's really, really sad, actually. Idols are being substituted for fake ones, newly made ones, and smuggled off somewhere. So this is all part of the Chola story, actually, but that is at the end of the Chola Empire. Actually, after the Cholas faded out was when the Muslim Islamic invasions came south. But those same idols that were made in Chola times were buried underground. So a lot of the idols that are used today in those temples were made in Vijayanagara times, actually. The very few original Chola idols still in worship.
See, when we talk about Movenders, Pallavas are remembered as Sangam literature. Cholas are the only people who have left this concrete Brihadishwara and the bronzes and everything else, because Chera again comes through Sirapatikaram, which is essentially a literary imagination. And the only concrete imagination is from Chola. So did it play any role in you deciding to write on Rajaraja and not on, say, any of the Pandya king or a Chera king?
Yes, but to be honest, I wrote about Rajaraja because I was asked to write about that. So that was my publisher's mandate. He said, write a book on Rajaraja. So that's what I did. But I'm glad I did because, as I researched and as I found out more, you realize what a larger than life figure he was and what an impact he has made in, in the history of the region and the history of our country also. So, and the Cholas, as I said, inscribed their inscriptions stood out in two ways. One is the sheer number of inscriptions that they left and also the quality of the inscriptions. So Rajaraja kind of tried to standardize his inscriptions by adding a portion where he kind of laid out in a chronological fashion all his achievements. So that, again, of course, that there's hyperbole, there's exaggeration, there's, self-praise and all that, but it's something. You have that as, and that it is Rajaraja, because previously you didn't know which king wrote what, they all had the same names. The dating protocols were not known. So Rajaraja really, I feel he had a sense of history, in the way he went about things and the way he built his kingdom and administered his kingdom. There was a sense of a big picture. So every now and then there comes a king who's a Jupiter, he stands out amongst everybody else. And Rajaraja was definitely one of those. And I'm happy I got to write about him. So
I'll take one more question before we wrap up.
Good evening, ma'am.
yes.
As a history student, personally, I often confuse between the mythology and the historical events in history. இப்போ கூட பிரகதீஸ்வரா டெம்பிளுக்கு போகும்போது நிறைய mythological stories தான் அதிகமா கேட்க முடியுது. ஃபார் எக்ஸாம்பிள், அந்த ஹியூஜ் நந்தி ஸ்டாச்சு எடுத்துக்கிட்டா கூட அதுக்கு ஒரு ப்ராமினன்ட் mythological ஸ்டோரி தான் சொல்றாங்க. உங்களோட ரிசர்ச்ல நீங்க எந்த ஒரு பர்டிகுலர் மித்தாலஜிக்கல் ஸ்டோரி உண்மையிலே நடந்திருக்கலாம் அப்படின்னு ஏதாவது ஒரு இடத்துல உங்களுக்கு ஃபீல் ஆயிருக்காமா?
That's a very interesting question. Let me think. See, எல்லா mythology-ல கொஞ்சம் உண்மையா தான் இருக்கணும். It won't be entirely fake. I'm going blank right now. Okay, but before I think about a story, நான் நிறைய mythological stories வச்சிருக்கேன் இந்த புக்ல. நான் நிறைய எழுதியிருக்கேன். Because again, I think that gives you அவளோட திங்கிங் எப்படி, ஏன் இந்த மாதிரி ஸ்டோரிஸ் எல்லாம் சொல்றா, எப்படி திங்க் பண்றா, அந்த தாட் ப்ராசஸ்ல ஒரு ஐடியா கிடைக்கிறது நம்மளுக்கு. இந்த மாதிரி ஸ்டோரிஸ் சொன்னா this must be the kind of people that they are, because stories give you an insight into their psychology, into their mindset, into what they thought about themselves, into how they wanted people to think about them. அந்த மாதிரி எல்லாம். So mythology is very important. நம்ம சும்மா the stories சொல்லிட்டு you cannot shove that aside. But உங்க questionக்கு I can't think of one story that I feel might have come out of, I'm just going totally blank right now. So there is a story in the beginning of the book called the Movendar about the three dynasties, Cheras, Pandyas, and Cholas. They came out of the mind of Shiva to vanquish a very evil king. And the Cholas went to the Kaveri Delta and started their empire. Pandyas went to Madurai போய் empire start பண்ணா. Cheras westல கேரளால அவளோட empire start பண்ணா. So maybe there is a nugget of truth in this. ஒருவேளை there was an evil king that இவாள்லாம் join பண்ணி his name is Salivahana. Our defeat பண்ணிட்டு they started their kingdoms. Maybe there is some truth that out of which the story sprang. So, but I don't know. சொல்ல முடியாது.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, இன்னொரு டவுட். இங்க டைட்டில் படிக்கும் போதே கிங் ஆஃப் கிங்ஸ் அப்படின்னு இருக்கு. அதுல பார்க்கும் போது நார்மலா ஆக்சுவலா நானும் இன்னும் புக் படிக்கல. வெளிய இருந்து பார்க்கும் போது வந்து கண்டிப்பா அவரோட எல்லா விக்டரிஸையும் இல்ல முடிஞ்ச அளவு எவ்வளவு ஃபேக்சுவலா இருக்க முடியுமோ அந்த அவரோட பெருமைகள் எல்லாமே சொன்ன மாதிரி எனக்கு தோணுச்சு. அதாவது இன்னும் படிக்கல. வெளிய இருந்து பார்க்கும்போது ஏதாவது ஒரு நெகட்டிவ் திங் சொல்ல முடியுமா மேம்?
Negative நிறைய இருக்கு. Because every human being has negative and positive. So just to Rajaraja was the greatest king. He was kind, he was generous, he was compassionate, he was this. Adu matram sonna, it is actually doing him a disservice. He was very ruthless. Or insult பண்ணனா உடனே ஒரு ஆர்மி அனுப்பிட்டு he would kind of destroy them. So he was talking about Kandalur Salai, the victory over there. The trigger for that, apparently his diplomatic envoy was insulted. He got furious and he sent an army and he waged a war against that. Similarly, he was very generous in that, I think he took good care of the temple women and all that, but he also was greedy. He wanted everybody's territory, so he was a very devoted man, but there's a lot of treachery involved. It's backstabbing involved in running a kingdom. He invaded Sri Lanka. And about the Sri Lankan chronicles, the invasion patti. Apparently, it was brutal. He just destroyed the city of Anuradhapura. It was so badly destroyed that it could no longer be the capital of the Lanka Mandalam, but they changed it to Polonnaruwa. So he must have been a very cruel man and a very difficult man and a brutal man, but also a man of great vision. And I think all people have this combination of good and bad in different kind of proportions. So
thank you, ma'am. One last question, ma'am. இப்போ இருக்க பொலிட்டிக்கல் சிச்சுவேஷன்ல ஒரு காமன் தியரி ஒன்னு இருக்கிறது வந்து நாங்க கேள்விப்பட்டிருக்கோம். என்ன அப்படின்னா அங்க அந்த பிரகதீஸ்வரா டெம்பிள் கட்டும் போது நிறைய சர்வன்ட்ஸையும் நிறைய பேரை வந்து அங்க கொன்னுட்டதாகவும் அதனால ஒரு பொசிஷன்ல இருக்கக்கூடிய ஒரு கிரேட் பொசிஷன்ல இருக்கக்கூடிய ஒருத்தர் அங்க வந்து ஃப்ரண்ட் டோர் வழியா போக மாட்டாங்கன்ற ஒரு மிஸ்கன்செப்ஷனா இல்ல நார்மல் தியரியான்னு தெரியல. அது இருக்கு, அது உண்மையா மேம்? இல்ல அத பத்தி நீங்க என்ன நினைக்கிறீங்க?
I don't know. எனக்கு அது பத்தி தெரியாது. Sorry. நான் வாசிச்சிட்டு இல்ல. I should check it out. But தெரியல எனக்கு. I'm sorry.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, one last question. Yes. Yeah.
There are many myths around the Cholas, especially when we speak about the Cholas. We know more about the Cholas. As you said, many have researched about the Cholas. But still many mysteries and myths follows the Cholas, especially the temple.
Yes.
Like she said, there is one myth and there is the Nandi valandittirukku அப்படின்ற ஒரு myth. And they also say that one stone, the shadows doesn't fall. There are many number of myths around that temple. So why is that happening? Why this particular dynasty or particular king or particular this temple especially falls under lots of myths?
It's an interesting question. I think when something is so grand and great, it kind of lends itself to this kind of storytelling and myth making and things like that. So it is just the human nature that if it's some small insignificant thing, why would we bother? So when something is there this big and grand, it's just, I think it lets our imagination run wild. First of all, the Nandi was not built in Rajaraja's time. It was built much later. And the whole shadow thing is false because there is a shadow. So it's, I think, some work of human nature that we look at something huge and think there's got to be a lot of, I don't know if Rajaraja or the Cholas themselves kind of encourage this kind of thing. I know they encourage a lot of hyperbole and things like that. So maybe this is some offshoot of that.
Actually, Nandi is grown in Karnataka. They have a groundnut festival in Gandhi.
Groundnut.
Groundnut festival.
Okay.
So there you have biggest Nandi. They tell a story. It was growing and growing, and women got one case in Canada. She hit a nail on it, then it stopped.
Okay.
Very big Nandi.
Probably a scientific reason for it. I like to think that there's science behind all this. Yeah, yeah.
If there is no question, thank you very much for coming and sharing our insights with us.
Thank you. It's been delicious.
Books are available for sale. It's right outside.
Thank you.